financial firms that they have a huge bunch of fixed income products, that real estate developers that they have lands that they want to liquidate some of the value out of this illiquid asset. I think is something could be achieved with blockchain technologies.
Hi guys. In this episode of Value.Tokenized, we're interviewing Adrian Lai, CEO of Liquefy, Hong Kong-based security token issuance platform.
Adrian is going to tell us about his way to blockchain from asset management space, what's going on in the security token industry in Hong Kong and worldwide, and how traditional businesses that they're working with are benefiting from tokenization.
All right, Adrian, thank you so much for joining us today at Value.Tokenized. It's a pleasure to have you here. I can start from telling our audience a little bit about yourself and your career.
Cool, great. So my company now is called Liquefy. Apart from Liquefy, I actually have an investment company based in Hong Kong as well. The name is called Black Horse. So before the whole crypto or / blockchain career, my life has been with asset management. So I worked with a BlackRock asset management based in Hong Kong. I think a few years ago, I worked there for 4 years and have been doing sort of private bank distribution, corporate governance on the investment side as well. Until a point that we were looking at a lot of different technologies, so such as AI, robo-advisors, but one of the missing components I think was blockchain. That was amazing stuff to me, right? Because I was buying several Bitcoin myself and then realized how impactful the technologies behind Bitcoin is. So 2 years ago, 2017, I left my previous company, BlackRock, and I started investing more into the digital asset world until last year, which I think the tokenization of financial asset or whatever kind of illiquid asset is interesting to me, that I want to step more into this area. And that's the moment I start Liquefy.
We at Value.Tokenized, we try to focus really on on stories, so how people discover the blockchain space, how people for who previously haven't dealt with it can benefit from it. So, and what was the most exciting feature of blockchain technology that got you into it? So it was investing in the first place, but then what captured you and that why you stayed in this space?
So first of all, before I talk about this, probably I could elaborate more what Liquefy is, because basically what Liquefy does is what I believe in the most in the blockchain industry. So I think in terms of, for the blockchain, the whole feature is more about the immutability of the blockchain, and also that you could have data protected on the blockchain, so you could run any applications on top of the data. And that's why when Liquefy believed that blockchain can represent a registered member, the digital registered member. So when you have the shareholder information put on the registered member, you could run smart contracts. Basically, trading is one of the applications that are enabled by the digital registered member. That's why I believe that a tokenized or whatever, a digital version of illiquid asset market is a future for a lot of financial companies or whatever investors want to gain access to a new investor class. Because now, registered member is a simple concept, but then with the features presented by blockchain, now it could be something very powerful, even with the financial industry, right? So we talk a lot with financial firms that they have a huge bunch of fixed income products, that real estate developers that they have lands that they want to liquidate some of the value out of this illiquid asset. I think is something could be achieved with blockchain technologies. While a lot of conversations around payment in the blockchain space, we think it's interesting as well, whether it's interbank transfer or P2P transfer that we're looking at. I had a call just before this meeting with one of the biggest hotel group to have loyalty points on blockchain, right? How do you issue loyalty points to individuals with instantaneous settlement, with immutable record settled on the blockchain? There's something interesting to me as well as a consumer to use these products. So I think it's multiple things you could do on the blockchain side while I'm pretty focused on the financial asset from a financial asset perspective.
So it sounds like the clients that Liquefy is focused on are coming from non-crypto space. So these are traditional businesses. And can you describe your like typical client and explain how other traditional businesses can benefit with what you're trying to achieve at Liquefy?
Right. Yes, you're right that our clients typically are traditional clients. And while we're focusing on two areas, the first area is the more traditional space, financial space, real estate space. And the second area is more exotic asset classes that I will elaborate more later. In the financial asset space, we have clients in real estate. We have closed-end funds, i.e. venture capital funds that have a long lockup period. And the exotic area plays, we're looking at esport. So esport is an interesting area, especially in Asia. We are looking at sport teams. So one of our investors is buying out a major sport team that we potentially will tokenize several percent of that team. A key point of tokenization is when you are an asset owner, you want to unlock some of your asset values. At the same time, on the other spectrum, you have to find investors that didn't have the access to this kind of investment products. Whereas sport teams is traditionally owned by billionaires. If I were just millionaires based in Hong Kong and I want to buy out few percentage of, for instance, Manchester United, just an example, it was impossible. And provided that with the nature of security tokens, you will have potential liquidity in the future that you could trade out exposure that didn't happen before. And obviously on the traditional asset side, real estate, you could perform various kind of real estate products. First of all, you have risk in traditional market, that is a liquid type of product, but you could also package several buildings, selected buildings into certain type of REIT and tokenize that product. You could also perform project financing type of activities to fundraise with the STO and to buy a piece of land, right? Usually when you are developers and you want to buy a piece of land, you will go to banks and you will go to family office. But now you could use the STO as a different channel to do that. So there's different kind of ways to play around it. Normally when we talk about security tokens offerings, people apply to startups, right? And apply to real estate buildings. And I think there are multiple innovations that we could play around.
I'm talking about tokenizing a sports team. So what is the exact assets and what are the rights that are associated with this?
It's interesting. So sport teams, when we consider exotic asset, we are tokenizing the company holding the sport teams, right? So a private company holding the sport teams, or some of the sport teams are held by public companies that currently we are not touching yet because involving a lot of listing rules. So when we tokenize a private company and the shares being tokenized, it's basically the ownership of the underlying asset, which is the sport teams, right? So if you own 1% of this private company, you would have exposure to a sport team, but people will ask, so do I have the underlying right affiliate with the sport team? So we could code that in the smart contract as well. For instance, being a shareholder of the private company, you could have membership right. And that membership right will put that into a separate utility token. So it's an interesting concept because when we talk about security tokens, you could build a connectivity among several types of tokens. It could be utility token, it could be loyalty point, and the security token itself. But it has to be, we have to make sure that they're separated because ICOs happened last year was exactly the case that we haven't separated security nature from the utility nature. So now we separate them out. And being a shareholder of the company holding the sport teams, we could inject ideas like membership to watch certain number of games. You could have certain rights to see some of the players. And ideally, with different type of rights, you could price different type of security tokens as well.
How is this is possible from regulatory standpoint in Hong Kong because you're based there, Liquefy is there? Please tell us something about what's going on in the digital asset space from legal perspective.
right? So Hong Kong have defined security tokens very clearly as a complex product. Complex product in from a security law point of view is basically similar to derivative. So, for instance, futures, options, some complex hedge funds. Meaning that when you're trying to sell security tokens, if you are a licensed firm and you have to tell the regulator that you're doing certain selling of digital asset or security tokens. Well, whether it's easy or not, it will depend on that licensed firm, whether they have experience in selling derivative products before, right? And in similar Asian jurisdictions like Singapore, I think they categorize security tokens broadly as shares, which is quite interesting because you see there's not a lot of successful case in Singapore when they put the definition that broad, because still you have to talk to regulators. And for Liquefy, we have two set of regulations we have to take care of. First of all, the issuance. When you issue a security token, which regulations is governing the issuance. So we are doing the tokenization on the Cayman level, which is the offshore, meaning that Cayman law is governing our issuance, while the distribution has to be, we have to follow different jurisdictions for our distribution. For instance, if we sell in Hong Kong, if we sell in Singapore, there are different sets of regulations that we have to follow. Our technologies, same as some of our competitors, have our compliance protocol in place, but then it's very Asian focused, right? We are not catering to the US market. We're working with an international law firm to code that specific security law into the compliance protocol. So to make sure that when the client's product is being tokenized, they could be sold in some major Asian jurisdictions automatically. But obviously, we have our in-house counsel to regularly look at all this change in regulation.
And just previously, you mentioned a lot of exciting applications, a lot of different assets that can be issued on blockchain. And how does secondary market look in Hong Kong and worldwide? How do you see it developing?
Well, I see that, to be frank, right, even we are in the security token space, it's quite early to talk about liquidity, right? And when I look at the Asian jurisdiction as well as the US market, there are not a lot of exchange that could provide liquidity. I mean, to be fair, if you put an order on a security token exchange and it got set to a month later, I still think it's a breakthrough, because before you need to take several years, or you have to find OTC players to sell the asset outright. So still, I think it's a breakthrough. But in terms of liquidity, it's not comparable to crypto asset. And the major barrier is because of, I wouldn't say it's regulation, it's because regulator is not educated enough about the space. But if you look at the overall space in Hong Kong, I think 2 years ago, Hong Kong Exchange had an initiative called Private Market, that they want to allow private companies to be traded, whether it's using a security token or whatever kind of technologies. I think the idea is there to allow this to be happening. In Hong Kong, we have SFC has a sandbox, which is particularly for security token exchange. So far, there's no approval yet, but there's a main goal for the regulator to push this forward. In US, obviously, NASDAQ, several traditional exchanges trying to cater to this space as well. So I think liquidity will be something huge to me in 12 months' time, right? And obviously, for any STO players to be successful, ultimately, it depends on whether there's liquidity or not. So we all have to have faith in this.
And speaking about different initiatives, you have recently partnered up with Neo to create your own security token ecosystem based on Neo blockchain. Can you tell us about this initiative? What are the goals and what you're planning to achieve here?
Okay, so first of all, the objective of Liquefy ultimately is to connect to the public world, right? Whether currently we're using public Ethereum, we're using private blockchain such as Quorum by JP Morgan. I think at the end, the public kind of involvement has to be required even in the security token world. The reason we work with Neo, a lot of the rationale is because they're huge in Asia. They're huge in Asia, that the impact in Asia even China has a kind of a, I wouldn't say negative, but being cautious about the whole digital asset space. I'm quite confident in 2 years of time, they will open up the market, especially on tokenization of asset. ICO will definitely be banned in China, but this is a huge space potentially in China. So when we talk to Neo, I think it's a huge discussion around whether we should build the security token standard on Neo. So whether we should connect some of the Asian project players to build the security token tokenization on Neo. So that's what we are doing basically. Currently, the team is helping to build a new Neo standard on security tokens. In short term, we are trying to bring in some of the asset owners to use Neo as a protocol to tokenize illiquid asset. In longer term, whether we will collaborate on even on exchange and certain type of products, I think there's a longer term discussion. But we're quite happy to work with them.
And how do you see the digital asset space evolving in the next, let's say, 12 months, both in Hong Kong and worldwide?
If it's not just about a security token in terms of overall digital asset space, even including cryptocurrencies. So I think the space is getting much more institutional based. It's not just about, people talk about institutional involvement every day, but from my perspective, when we talk to my old colleagues or even players traditionally in the financial space, they are investigating into digital currencies or even security tokens as a substitute for current fundraising method. So I think the space is going much more mature in the coming 12 months, which with a lot of connectivity between traditional institutions and the frontier players, i.e. the blockchain startups, right? So we were approached by several banks, by several financial institutions on more educational stuff, even they're pretty new to blockchain. Back to 2 years ago, when I started building my company in this space, everyone is talking about trading Bitcoin, trading cryptocurrencies, but now it's more on the applicational level. While the second point is, I think regulators are pretty educated after the ICO space. They're pretty ICO wave. They're pretty understanding what's happening in this space. Now they have to create an infrastructure or the relevant regulations to govern the space. And I think it's pretty good because when we talk about last year, people talk about the movement and regulations. Nothing really happened except the CBOE and the futures market opening up. Now we have back opening up in later this year. We have Facebook trying to fight with or debating with the government on launching their own product. We will see real development from an institutional point of view. Whether it's good or not, I think is still a question because now it's a closed-end system within the institutions. But I think it's a good starting point to push that into the public domain in the future. I think lastly is we'll see a lot of projects dying in this space, whether it is the token space or the security token space, right? So I think in both space, a lot of projects will run out of capital. That some companies in Hong Kong, they go bankrupt, even though they're pretty active last year. So the key in this space is whether you could fundraise, sustain to a point that the market is mature or the technology is mature enough for you to really grow, right? So and the ICO wave has pretty died down a bit. Those projects who survive, they survive, and those who have a failing product they're just gone. So I think it's pretty good for the space.
All right, Adrian, thank you so much for joining us today at Value.Tokenized. It was a pleasure. This was Value.Tokenized with Masha and Xenia. Thank you for watching.
If you have any questions to Adrian, please feel free to leave them in comments. We'll make sure that Adrian answers them. And don't forget to subscribe.